Hi, I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. President Biden's coronavirus stimulus package has the intention of flooding the economy with money at a time when economic growth is sputtering. Now, ironically, it contains one provision that's likely to create exactly the opposite of what he intends, and that is raising the national minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that a $15 minimum wage will help the economy more than it's going to harm it. That was according to a January 24th, 21 article in MarketWatch by Elizabeth Buchwald. She says a $15 minimum wage will really help many, and that the job loss will be very minimal, if anything. Research from the Congressional Budget Office, often referred to as the CBO, found that while the income of 1.7 million workers will increase, there's a 66 chance of probability that 1.3 million workers would actually lose their entire jobs by 2025. And the maximum job loss could go to 3.7 million. The problematic issue with raising the federal minimum wage is that there is no consistency in minimum wages between states. Now, this is something I've never heard the financial press talk about, or even politicians or elected officials. Consider this. The highest minimum wage is $13.50 in Massachusetts, $13.69 in Washington, $13 or $14 in California, depending on the size of the business, and $15 in the District of Columbia. So obviously, if you live in the District of Columbia, $15 minimum wage is not going to change anything. Now, the lowest minimum wages are $5.15 an hour in Georgia and Wyoming. And that's superseded for many businesses in those states by the current federal minimum of $7.25. So by and large, $7.25 is pretty much the minimum in most states. South Dakota's minimum wage is $9.45. Now, why is this a problem? I mean, wouldn't it be a good thing for every state to have to pay a fixed federal minimum wage? Well, a flat one-size-fits-all wage doesn't consider the enormous local variations in the cost of living and taxes. What matters more than the dollar amount of the minimum hourly wage is the amount workers have left after paying taxes and what the remainder buys in goods and services. So updating some data from the Council for Community and Economic Research, which was presented by the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, I found after adjusting for cost of living and taxes, the purchasing power of a worker earning $15 in Washington, D.C. is equal to that of a worker in Mississippi earning $8.46 an hour, or someone in South Dakota earning $9.67 an hour. Now, since South Dakota's minimum wage is $9.45, an increase of 22 cents an hour in South Dakota would put it at the equivalent of a $15 minimum wage in Washington, D.C. So basically, South Dakota at $9.45 is pretty much on par with Washington, D.C. at $15 an hour. Both of them, in effect, have a $15 minimum wage when viewed in its buying power, standard of living, cost of living. It's clear enough to both proponents and opponents that an increase in the federal minimum wage would increase both labor costs for businesses and the cost of goods and services for consumers. Some supporters of a $15 federal minimum wage seem to make two assumptions that I find amazingly naive. One is that business owners could easily absorb the increased labor costs right out of their profits, presumably high profits. A second is that the higher costs of goods and services would primarily affect wealthier consumers. The money to double some workers' wages would not simply come out of profits. Many small businesses don't have enough profit to absorb the increased costs. Nor would it realistically come from the rich paying more for goods and services. Small businesses would need to raise their prices on basic necessities as well as discretionary goods and services. This would raise living costs for everyone, not just the rich. Higher prices result in falling revenues to businesses as fewer consumers can afford to buy their product or service. So falling revenues then mean small businesses will need to cut their payroll in order to survive. The result is that a $15 national minimum wage would make lower paying jobs even scarcer in small cities and states, thus wiping out the advantages of the higher minimum wage paid to others. States need the power to set their own minimum wages to account for local cost of living expenses and taxes. A federal minimum wage needs to accommodate the wide range of living costs throughout the country. Thanks for listening.